So there is a new After Effects competitor called Autograph. Apparently Revision, who created After Effects plugins like Real Smart Motion Blur, is distributing it. And I've also heard the developer of Natron is also part of the team. The key features that make it interesting are OpenFX support, an interactive 2D and 3D viewport, and After Effects import. We will later take a look at how well that import works. Also, it has a one-time payment option, including 12 months of free updates. It also has a free version, which you can also use commercially, but you can't save more than 2 projects with it, face resolution and frame rate limitations, and some effects have a watermark. Otherwise, it claims to have all the features of the full version integrated. I also want to point out how it is available on Windows, Mac and Linux. It's also supposed to have a drag and drop integration to DaVinci Resolve, which could be a game changer for having motion design in DaVinci Resolve. Like, apparently you can even customize the inputs for Resolve. From what it looks like, this feature doesn't seem to be available for Linux currently, as it's still in its beta. I will start this video by exploring the app and the stated features and share my first impressions with you. After that, I will work on 2 projects off screen and then showcase them to you and tell you what it feels like developing something from start to finish in Autograph. So take the first part of this video with a grain of salt, as those are my first impressions. So let's get right into the app itself. It launches by showing a sick motion graphic banner. And then after 40 seconds, the app actually started. I started by testing the basics of the app. I created a shape and tested the transform tools. The transform icons look pretty sci-fi. I often happen to accidentally move the anchor point of an object, but when I wanted to move it back to its original position, I couldn't replicate it. I wanted to set up outlines for the shape, and since I saw that the fill was located in the outliner, I thought I could just add it there. And this is already where you start to notice the main problem of the UI. Everything is so nested, and there are so many icons that look the same, but actually offer different options depending on which type of object they're next to. So I had a really hard time figuring out which dropdown I would have to open. I managed to find it in the end, but it took some time and frustration. I had it on creating a solid layer and then added a procedural noise texture. While going through the huge amount of different parameters you can customize, I faced the problem that sometimes the whole texture turned blue. And after tinkering for a while, I noticed it's a selection overlay. Apparently the overlay creates outlines based on the transparency of the object. And since the noise texture consisted out of so many fine details, the whole screen just happened to turn blue. And sometimes yellow. Also took me a while to find where I could deactivate the overlay. You can also use Shader Toy in Autograph, where you can code shaders. This is an advanced feature, so in the free version it will have a watermark. You can just go to Shader Toy's website and copy-paste some codes. Sometimes some adjustments are needed, for example if a shader uses some additional inputs like images. Inside the Autograph tool, you can directly apply a gamma correction and also set the mouse cursor position, since Shader Toy can react to mouse movement. But I don't understand why Autograph enforces a watermark there, since in Natron, which is completely free, you can use Shader Toy shaders and also render them at any resolution and frame rate you want. Alright, let's get into animating. So yeah, I've added 2 keyframes to a circle and then wanted to see what kind of easing options they have. And okay, that's a long list. What might look like a lot of preset options ultimately just is bad UI design. Like, every option exists multiple times because you have to choose if you want to use the interpolation only at the beginning, only at the end, or both. Like, the whole UI is so incredibly nested, but for this one they just went for a huge ass list. I also switched to the curve editor to look at the different interpolations. When I tried moving the points, I couldn't see a change on the canvas. But apparently this was just because sliding the value with your mouse is only slightly changing the values. And this applies to every transform value. I use this method to change values a lot in other programs. And I would have liked the translation to be more suitable to the current canvas resolution. Let's try to add motion blur to it. Oh, it crashed. And I didn't save. And it didn't create a backup itself. When I recreated the scene, I also tested the motion path tool and I have to say it works pretty well. Okay, let's add motion blur again. Okay, it didn't crash, but I don't see a change. After trying to figure it out, I've read through the documentation and yeah, apparently motion blur can only be set up for layers. And since I moved the shape by using the transform sliders in the settings of the shape, which is inside the path layer, which is inside the layer, which would work with motion blur, I couldn't add motion blur. So there are like 5 transform sliders and I happened to use the wrong one. Oh, and I didn't specifically choose to use this exact transform. The keyframes were automatically added by moving it on the canvas. But yeah, no motion blur if you do it this way. When it comes to 3D tools, don't expect to get far without additional software, because you really just use it for already finished assets, and if you don't already have experience in doing 3D, you are gonna have a hard time. Like creating a PBR material and using an environment texture was already not really intuitive to set up. I would prefer having some sort of automatization here. It's kind of hard for me to compare it to After Effects, because After Effects has two very different approaches to creating 3D content, either with the classic integrated 3D renderer or with Cinema 4D. They do mention you can use an autograph comp as a texture of a model, but I was so overwhelmed by the UI that I would just render it out and then use it inside a 3D application. Even if I would manage to easily set it up in Autograph, I would still prefer to render my 3D scene in a dedicated path tracer like Cycles, Octane or whatever, and then composite it in Autograph. Compositing our already rendered 3D scene worked pretty much like expected. The color grading is not that artist friendly in my opinion, it's more like doing color science honestly, but works out for me. Just may not feel as fun as in something like Resolve. The effects are called modifiers in Autograph. The modifiers were all real time to use, which is pretty nice. Oh, and by the way, the imported 3D render is in the OpenEXR format, which is nice that Autograph supports it, because it's a widely used format in processing 3D scenes, because it can have multiple layers, including information like a depth map or ambient occlusion, and it's also in high dynamic range. I just wanted to add text to the scene, and I had such a hard time again finding where to change the font. For some reason, it now uses the top left corner, which I didn't really look at while searching, because this area was already saved as purely being my media pool in my head. I continued exploring the options to animate text. Again, Autograph gives you a high amount of different options. And of course, it's great to have as many customization options as possible in your creative software, but when there are too many different values at once, try merging them by integrating them into a more visual interface. Or at least give me a few presets so I don't have to manually change all 50 settings from scratch. You can also create dynamically animated text like in After Effects. You know, those number countdowns or count ups and stuff. Now let's get into the part I am most excited about, the Resolve integration. So yeah, the link feature should be included as an effect in Resolve, and yes, here it is. Okay, let's open one of the projects. Where the hell are they saved at? After looking into the settings of Autograph, I found the path and tried opening it in Resolve. Yeah, that didn't work. But I can also use some kind of browse feature, where I have to log into Autograph again, which is annoying, but maybe that will do. Okay, so it's a visual display of my projects. Yeah, both didn't open. Using this browser, there was also an example file, but that also didn't open. Looking at the documentation to troubleshoot, I should have marked a composition in Autograph as the main composition. But this option has always been grayed out for me. Okay, apparently it's just always in dark gray, which is confusing, but yeah, I still couldn't get the integration to work. The After Effects converter is probably something many people look forward to, but I already have to take some of your excitement. The converter is only available if After Effects 2024 or later is installed on your system, so its entire purpose is to migrate your After Effects projects when you're switching. And boy, if you really convert all your projects, you're gonna face a long night. Of course, plugins can't be converted, and also only a handful of stock effects can be converted. I didn't have any luck with importing projects I had around, so I created an After Effects project with the entire purpose of kinda benchmarking it. I didn't look at the documentation of what's supported for it because I wanted to create a realistic scenario, but I did add some challenges for the converter, like multiple shapes on one layer with different cap styles, and also animated trimmed paths, added a noise effect on top, and a text with one of the preset text animations. And that's what it looks like in Autograph. Yeah. I wanted to give it another try, so I updated After Effects and created another example. Okay, I don't know what it is I'm doing wrong. Okay, I will now take a break to dive deeper into the software, and then I will give you a summary of that experience and a final conclusion. After further examining the software and actually developing some test projects from start to finish, I think I realized why the software felt so frustrating for me. While it is kinda marketed at just being After Effects but from a different company, the workflow is very different at many points, and most things that are similar to After Effects are rather superficial. I felt like Autograph's focus lies more on compositing and procedural motion effects, while After Effects' main usage is for motion graphics nowadays. I also saw that Autograph gets compared to Nuke a lot, which kinda underlines a bigger focus on compositing tools. Nonetheless, I took the time to freestyle a motion design project. It starts with a ball that I animated with the motion paths to give it a swing motion. I also set it up to use a high amount of motion blur and then use curves on the alpha channel to increase the contrast to create a smear effect. I also added a SVG of a coffee cup I made in Affinity Designer and added shading with a gradient in Autograph. The ball falls into the cup of coffee and the cup responds by slightly shaking, and I've added a splash effect. I've created a splash effect by using a noise texture with a mask that's kinda shaped like a splash, and then I keyframed a lot of different values and effects. Like, I animated a manipulation of the alpha channel, added a bending modifier to distort it, and a lot more of small adjustments I made to it. Like, I also used a retiming effect to make it more choppy, to give it a very slight hand-animated look. I also added a text animation, and this was pretty straightforward, but did require some tinkering. So yeah, there are many tools for motion design in Autograph, but it was very hard for me to get the look I've imagined. And on a quite poetic note, shouldn't a creative application help realize your ideas? But what I imagined is definitely possible in Autograph. I just expected it to work differently. So that could be exclusive to my personal preference. I wanted to give the real-time 3D renderer a try to see what the workflow was gonna be like. So I created a spaceship model in Blender since, I don't know, I kinda associate spaceships with VFX. The concept was inspired by something I saw on Google Images, and it's kinda a cargo spaceship. I also textured it using Instamat Studio, which I will also do a video of in the future. I added some details, like here the center wheel has metal panels outside, and I painted a mask that fits the pattern so it looks like some panels fell off. Back in Blender, I've added textures and animated it. Exporting the model to Autograph took some time though, but that's just a pain with 3D in general. I spent about 2 hours trying different file formats and settings within the exporters and the file itself. Because sometimes it wouldn't be textured, sometimes it was textured but the animation was missing, sometimes it was only textured in the Hydrostorm render engine of Autograph, and sometimes this happened. Autograph recommends the USD format, but I had no luck with it. I managed to get it to work using the gltf exporter while unchecking Optimize Animation and selecting Merge Actions. If you want to try it yourself, I've uploaded the export preset on my website. Just drag and drop it into this folder and it will appear here in Blender. Hopefully I can save you some time. Inside Autograph, everything is pretty much real time. I've tried different render settings, added a gradient background and created a sun using a circle with a volumetric ray modifier. And I noticed that by enabling depth of field, the 3D scene gets put on a black background. So I had to disable it in order to make my background visible. But I could also add depth of field using the defocus modifier, where I used the gradient as a depth map. And the defocus modifier is pretty good. It gives you a good amount of customization, like chromatic aberration or defining the shape and the bloom of the bokeh. I've also used the lens distort filter, several color corrections, and noise texture to act like some sort of sandstorm, and film grain to make everything blend together. And then I had to stop because the viewport just got too laggy for my taste. But keep in mind, it's rendering a 3D scene in real time while applying multiple effects, and also at full resolution. So it was quite a workload. Again, I would say it still was kind of frustrating. The color grading tools remain to not feel very intuitive to me. Everything is hidden inside a dropdown and there are so many values that I have to trial and error a lot until I find this one setting I wanted. This pretty much applies to everything in Autograph for me, but with color grading I was especially expecting something more intuitive. What I do want to showcase is this cool layer stack in the preview. It gives you a good visualization of all your layers and what they're adding to the scene. I wasn't too happy with how my 3D model looked in the real-time engine, so I rendered the animation in Blender and then put it into Autograph for compositing. So this time I use a pre-rendered multi-layer EXR image sequence. So there are different layers included in the images, like the depth map, normals, and data for the cryptomat, which enables me to create masks in Autograph by just clicking on the elements within the viewport. And the OpenEXR support of Autograph is actually very good. It's very easy to cycle through the layers. In After Effects, this is less intuitive. So now I had a lot of different maps I could use for special modifiers. For example, I use the depth map on the defocus modifier, which again worked really well. And using the normal map, I could utilize the real light 2D modifier, and it's a fantastic feature to play around with. Basically, a normal map uses the RGB channels to display the direction each pixel faces in a 3D space. So every RGB channel represents one dimensional axis. This enables us to light an image like it's still a 3D object. It's really fun to play around with, and it works in real time. I just had some trouble figuring out how to link the maps to the modifiers, and it would be really cool if Autograph would look for a layer having normal in its name, so I don't have to select it myself. I also tried using the environment layer as a mask, but couldn't figure out how, so I used a workaround using different blend modes. However, this composition again made me realize that the color grading tools stopped me from achieving my goals. And I definitely believe the tools have the capabilities to achieve my goals, but they just feel so boring to use and I have a hard time finding what I want. To get a better feel of what I miss, I went into Resolve and used Fusion to composite the scene. And I noticed those are the main things that made me achieve a better result in Fusion. The workflow with nodes, the color grading in the color page, especially cycling through LUTs to get a better idea of what could look good, particle systems, and more dedicated effects like just dragging a vignette into the scene instead of building it myself using the gradient tool. Left Angle said they are working on a node-based system, which will also include particle simulation. And this is really interesting. Having both layers and nodes could open up a huge potential, but we will have to see how they will integrate it. And this is kinda the core problem of the software. It's all very promising, but it's not there yet. I do think the team behind the software is competent and they definitely seem ambitious. And there are some things they fundamentally made better than After Effects. For example, the default position of anything to be centered is at 0 on both axes. In After Effects, it's always half of the current resolution, because both axes are based on the pixel count. So in Autograph, they created a user-friendlier approach. You can also choose between a regular and an infinite adjustment layer, which will cover the whole canvas no matter what. Sometimes you might not want that, for example if you want an adjustment layer to only affect half of your canvas, which is why you're offered the choice. Both of these things make it easier to change the resolution of your project later on. In After Effects, you would have to rescale everything, which is especially fun if you have already keyframed the scaling. They also often roll out updates with relevant features. For example, they've recently presented a preview of their lens flare creator. While using the software, I could tell the software does a lot of things correctly under the hood, and that it already has many features, but the UI makes it a bit hard to get to them. You can tell it's been crafted with a lot of love. Like, they created an extra icon for pretty much everything, even for all the layer styles. But there are always so many values you can customize that it actually just takes longer to achieve what I want. Also, the LiveLink with Resolve could be really useful, but that's also still in beta and I couldn't get it to work. Which also brings me to another issue. The user base is still so small, I couldn't find solutions to a problem over Google. So at points where the documentation, which I actually used a lot, didn't help me, I was kinda stuck. And I mean, I did figure out a lot of stuff by myself while using the software, but if a bridge between two programs doesn't work, there's little I can do. Another thing is that the OpenFX support is not accessible in the free version. Finally, I would say Autograph looks very promising and could become a real competitor to After Effects because it combines both compositing and motion design features, which not a lot of programs do. Also, the fact that it supports all desktop platforms makes it interesting, because I could see it become one of the standard apps to have installed for Linux users. But currently, I don't see an advantage for myself to use it. However, competition is always good to have, and I'm excited to see what the future brings. So definitely keep an eye on it. I still wouldn't advise buying the license just yet, because with the current amount of features, the price is a bit steep, especially when comparing it to Resolve Studio, which also is a lifetime license instead of a permanent license with 12 months of free updates. But I saw Autograph offers 50% sales sometimes. And I think this software will definitely become a very relevant alternative in the future. So right now, you could get yourself familiar with it and become one of the first tutorial and asset creators for it. If you currently want to get an After Effects replacement, I advise you to use a combination of Cavalry for motion design, Resolve for compositing and Blender for 3D. Those are my current softwares of choice and they can all be used for free, while Cavalry and Resolve have a premium option. If you want to know more about this combination of software, I've made a video about it which you can check out.